There's often a fair bit of flexibility around the rules themselves. So if you're a company and you're trying to get your project to fit into the rules, you can, especially if you have a relationship with your regulator, you can sit down, talk about what's the spirit and intent of the rule, and can we get there another way? So that's possible. You get yourself set up well with your community, and that is often 90% of your battle.
Welcome to Under Review, powered by Ultimarii, the interview series where we unpack the decisions that shape what gets permitted and what gets delayed across North America. Each episode, we sit down with regulators, subject matter experts, practitioners, and project leaders to break down the rules, the realities, and the playbook for getting critical infrastructure approved.
Hey everybody, I'm Doug Schweitzer, co-founder of Ultimarii. We're here today to talk about the regulatory process here in Canada. And we have an amazing guest with us, Brian, and we're gonna talk a lot about his life experience. I mean, amazing history of project development, both from the project proponent side, advising people, but then also a life as a regulator as well. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. A little bit of background on myself as well. I used to be an elected official, so I've seen the regulatory process from trying to make sure the legislation and regulations are drafted just right to try and enhance investment into your province. So we appreciate everybody listening in here today. So Brian, thank you for doing this.
It's really been fun. The only weird issue is ever since I started thinking about this stuff, I've been dreaming about old projects, and that's a very frightening thing to have happen.
Well, that's what we want to learn from the old projects. And just before we started here, we were chatting about mining, probably one of the more complicated types of projects to get through a regulatory process. And you were talking about the need to actually go to the local Tim Hortons and talk to folks. So I'd love to hear about this project.
Absolutely, and it's a good example. A lot of my examples are ancient, okay? They're as old as the coal that was in this particular mine, but I think most of the learnings are still very relevant today, and I got to admit, about 90% of the things that I got involved with and where there were problems and where things worked was around your relationship with your community. My experience is that on the regulatory side of things, there's often a fair bit of flexibility around the rules themselves. So if you're a company and you're trying to get your project to fit into the rules, you can, especially if you have a relationship with your regulator, you can sit down, talk about what's the spirit and intent of the rule, and can we get there another way? So that's possible. You get yourself set up well with your community, and that is often 90% of your battle. And before we get into mine, let me give you a perfect example. Many years ago, and I will say the corporate names, Shell and Husky, both applied to develop the Caroline gas field. They both wanted to build a gas plant. We'd never had anything like that before at the ERCB. And great applications, great companies, great skill sets, and it came down to what were we going to choose between? Turned out the folks at Caroline liked Shell better than Husky. And it was as simple as that. I got the opportunity once to encourage a company. That was an interesting thing about the regulatory process in those days. It was a different relationship with the companies because we interacted with them on every level. That they appreciated, like our staff at the ERCB. I mean, they knew the industry inside and out. They often knew way more than the applicants for a project or project that was ongoing. So we had one where they lost control of a well really close to a small town in southern Alberta. It was just pure methane, but you could start to smell natural gas in the community. It was a major amount of. So the company wanted to bring in a tool that would let them cap the well without setting it on fire, but it was going to be hours and hours away. And so there were the guys in the room, some of them had been through the lodgepole blowout where we killed two workers, not when the well was on fire, but when it was out. They for some reason, they ended up with their masks off their face, and they ended up dying from H2S.
Wow.
Yeah, so we were all of us had been around lodgepole, and so, I just simply I said, why don't you phone the company back and see if they might reconsider the decision? Again, in those days, so I was a board member, and basically 30 minutes later, they set the rig on fire, and a $4 million rig just went crumple down unfortunately,
yeah.
But we didn't hurt a single person. Suddenly, there's no more gas smell in town, and it was a job to put it out. But the idea of coming in with there's a door on the rig floor that weighs about that'd be about 400 kilos, okay, and the gas was coming out in a horizontal jet, and it was holding this hinge door like this.
Wow.
So it tells you how much gas was coming out of this well, and so I just had a vision of them bringing equipment in, one spark, and now I've got dead people on my conscience too, because I didn't do anything either, and I just couldn't do that.
Wow. So tell me about the transition, what it was like going from industry, and then how'd you end up at a regulator? How'd you end up, who convinced you, twisted your arm to go into that side of the equation?
Well, it was an interesting discussion, because when I did it, I did not know anything about the ERCB. So my first 10 years of my career my background's environmental. So I was doing the environmental parts of applications for a whole lot of very large projects. For example, worked on 5 different pulp mills in Alberta in that period from, what was that, 1981 to 1989. So that was that. So there was, a huge number of pulp mills. Worked on, did a bunch of environmental trials. Those were interesting. And that's a whole podcast unto itself, believe me. And so I was enjoying myself, but I got what is happening at the ERCB was an interesting organization then. First of all, they were truly professional regulators. Okay, and what I say so there's a reason that, and you'd understand this, there's a reason that we don't use ex-policemen as judges anymore. They're lawyers now, right? Yeah. They're lawyers with a lot of experience, because being a judge is a profession. And what we forget about is that being a regulator actually is a profession. And the example I use for industry guys, I say, well, so you have kids? Yeah. Okay. So you got rules for your kids? Yeah. Okay. Tell me one rule that applies equally to all 3 of your children on all, and they go, well, none. Well, it's okay. Multiply that by 700 companies, and that's your problem. It is hard work. And so at the ERCB, these were lifers. When I went and joined the board, these are guys that had been there their whole career. They knew everything. So that was fun. But what was happening to them, they were all excellent economists, geologists, engineers. Around that time, the issue that they were dealing with over and over again was environmental. And so they were having trouble finding internally somebody that they thought. And so a call went out, and I got a call, and I won't say from whom, but he said, "You interested in a career change?" And I don't know, and I should have known. I went down and met the chairman, Jerry DeSorcy, who is, I can't say enough good things about Mr. DeSorcy. He was incredible, but I should have been warned. I go in, and he says, "Oh, okay. I was just down to sort of meet him," and he says, "Oh, I got your key card here." What? He says, "Oh yeah, because you're gonna." I said, "Well, I'm not starting for 3 months." And he said, "If I start at all," he said, "Yeah, but you got a lot of reading to do."
So reflecting back, what do you wish you had known before you'd started there?
There was a ton of stuff, but it was all learning on the job. And again, the staff were incredible. So much to learn about the entire energy industry. Because remember, now it's not just that little narrow piece of environmental. Oh, I remember the very first time they they hold up a piece of seismic paper, and all the, and as the guy goes, "As you can plainly see,"
You're like, oh, it's that plane.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. So you did learn a lot. What I did, where I really started learning stuff I really didn't want to learn, is when then remember the government merged the ERCB and the Public Utilities Board.
Yeah.
And suddenly, I'm a biologist doing rate hearings, and oh my goodness.
How was the learning curve for a rate hearing?
Oh, it was really hard. I could, again, good staff. So I this is what I need to know about how to calculate depreciation and rate, what the proper, and I would get it all, and I managed to retain it through the hearing, and immediately lose it all again, and I had to relearn it every damn time. It was just. And I do remember, again, coming home and say, well, I just lost 8 hours of my life I'll never get back. Have you sat in any of those?
No, I mean, my closest thing that I would have done from like my government side of things would have been like an estimates grilling where, you're the person that's the witness effectively. So you're the minister sitting in estimates with your budget. There's a whole committee of folks that are asking you questions, and it's kind of like showtime for, being basically grilled for, 3 to 6 hours, depending on what you're doing on that side. But, again, but the reason why I mentioned that is comparable in the sense that you have an amazing team of people getting together, all the background information for you. I think sometimes folks don't fully appreciate, the machinery of government or regulators and how many professional people are in there helping make sure that, really complicated systems are working well.
And you put your finger on. I mean, again, so when after I left, what I would find most of the time I was doing is a lot of the projects I worked on were companies that already kind of got themselves a little bit out of line, and so the very first thing you would realize is they hadn't built that relationship with the regulators. They viewed the regulator as kind of the enemy, which you can do. I understand that. But in a business environment, that's not going to work. You need to have your own relationship. Your consultants need to have their relationship, so that, as I say, there's all sorts of projects where they don't fit. They just, and you need to be able to work something. Well, if you're going in cold and you're trying to put something on the table, the best example I've ever, I had a client, and again, I'm not going to name them because they were terrible. It was the only client I've ever fired. But because I shouldn't say that. We just got to a point where they were tired of my advice, and I was tired of them ignoring my advice, and so we just decided let's not work together anymore. They were developing a major oil sands proposal. They had made commitments that they would be filing by June, and they were nowhere near close. They hadn't even hired. They hired their consulting engineers in January for a major project that they intend to file in June. And I just said,
timelines are just off.
I said, this is impossible. But then I said, but let me see what I think I got an idea that I can do. So I went to Fort McMurray. I knew the chief regulator there, a smart engineer, really creative. And I said, look, these guys have made this commitment that they were going to file. It's a financial commitment, and he got it. He'd seen this 100 times, right? It was not his first rodeo at all. I said, there's no way they're not going to be anywhere close to filing a good application in June. But this is a unique project. They have a novel technology for extracting oil sands, and they have a novel and difficult geology that's going to require a different approach to mining. Depending on the results of that, the whole rest of the application will flow. Would you be okay if we filed on those two questions, those two issues?
It's narrow scope.
Really narrow scope, just saying we're looking at you to tell us this is an acceptable way to extract the oil sand, and this is an acceptable way to mine. Because if it's not, then we're done. Or if there's a different way, we can fix, and then we can proceed. He thought, and this was a big step out for him. It was a big risk for him. And he finally said, but we did it right in the meeting. He said, that you can, go ahead. So I come back to Calgary. I'm all excited. I got you guys. It's great. Break. And they look at me and say, yeah, it's really wonderful. We'll go start right away. And a month later, they filed everything they had. Just a giant mess.
Big data dump.
Yeah. So, and this is a good lesson. I'm probably telling tales out of school, but I was embarrassed, right? And I phoned the guy in McMurray, and I apologized profusely. I said, really sorry. I mean, I had left working with them, and I had no idea they were going to do this. And he said, that's okay. I get it. And it was back up in McMurray about, a year later, and I said, so, whatever happened to that application? And he points to a pile of boxes in the corner of his office.
So that's it? That's the current status?
And again, you talk about somebody who blew it. I mean, they had an opportunity to not only move this project ahead and actually get really good advice on the design of it, basically free advice. Instead, they thought they knew what they were doing and just went ahead.
What would be your advice for proponents that are looking at that new novel technology and trying to do something creative? Like, what is the best approach for doing something creative in a regulatory system that's used to, like, if you're in a square peg in a square hole, it works, but if you're a round peg in a square hole, it may not work? Like, what's your sense?
First of all, don't go into your regulator the very first time with your brand new bright idea. Okay. Go in, explain that the concept of what you're thinking about, what you're trying to do, in a very general sense. Tell them that you'll probably be back because you realize don't have alignment. So you build a little relationship, you exchange some information. The second thing then, and that's just where when you do go in, make sure you understand the spirit and intent of the rule. So that you go in and you say, okay, I know it doesn't fit, but the intent of the rule was because most rules are actually around preventing environmental problems or safety problems, health-related noise, etc. That's when you look at the regulatory world, that's mostly what it's about. The spirit and intent of this particular rule is to X. We think, even though it doesn't fit, we can still meet that objective, get those relationships, and as I say, try to meet the spirit and intent of the rules. If you can't, okay, then you got to step back, and then you got to say, okay, do I need a regulatory change to actually get this thing, or is there a way to apply for a true regulatory exemption? But at least you've been
kind of a similar topic, but kind of trying to figure out like political will. Like, we're in a time right now, we've got a major project office, different tone in Ottawa than we had under the previous prime minister. Like, how much does political will and like the momentum of a government saying, hey, look, we want to get these projects built, how does that factor into a regulatory body? And the reason why I ask is, when I was Justice Minister for Alberta, I couldn't go tell the police what to do.
Nope.
Like, you can't tell them, like, hey, you go arrest uppers. That is completely offside. However, you can say, hey, look, we expect you to enforce the law. We expect you to make sure that we're a law-abiding place, and rural crime's an issue, and I want you to prioritize dealing with these challenges that are ahead.
Yep.
So how does that dynamic play out in the regulatory space?
I think you put your finger on it. I don't think any regulator objects to government saying, okay, these are our goals and objectives, and if you can get us to those goals and objectives, in fact, understanding those goals and objectives is really critical, because if you remember, almost all of, for example, all of the the various Pipeline Act, the Oil and Gas Act, they all put right in the third paragraph, in the public interest. That's the test for most regulators. Is this project in the public interest? And so if you get clear direction from government that we think this is how we would like to see this fit within that broad test. Again, though, being very careful. I mean, smart regulators understand they exist at the pleasure of governments. I mean, we would, at the ERCB, we would very carefully try to, on one hand, always preserve our independence. The rule of thumb, you never need to embarrass government. Yeah. You don't embarrass government. You provide them with information. You make sure they're in the loop. Don't have to, stand up on your back legs and complain about interference. Or you just quietly dealt with the issue. So it's a good relationship, and unfortunately, I think of course there's an election cycle every 4 years, and so they don't realize. In fact, we used to say, well, let me go back to the Shell Husky application. It's the perfect example because we issued our decision. We picked Shell, perfectly good application, and we were hearing from MLAs that were upset that they didn't get a chance to vote on the decision. They thought, well, we should have the final say, and the legislation actually didn't give them any say. And we're sort of going, we don't get this. Why would any politician in their right mind want to pick between two major oil and gas companies? Where is the upside for you politically on getting involved in that? Let us, as regulators, make the really crappy, nasty decisions that people are mad about, and then you can step back and say, well, they were working, they did their job, and it's an apolitical process. That's the beauty of it.
Well, the thing is, too, that's when you get yourself, it's almost a shield for elected officials as well. You don't want to be picking the winners and losers. Otherwise, people start alleging corruption and other issues, and people get scrutinized, and that's how political careers end rapidly.
Absolutely. And when I'm approving a really nasty little sour gas well in the middle or close to a community, why would you want to be there? I didn't tell you that I spent 2 years also then building the regulatory system for the intensive livestock industry in Alberta.
Let's hear about this. This is great.
Yeah.
So what was involved in getting that off the ground and focusing on that area?
Oh, well, okay, what happened is, so the years ago, the province had built the Natural Resources Conservation Board. Yep. And this was a very tiny, specialized board that really did one hearing every year and a half. And it was large non-oil and gas. They asked me, just because of my environmental background, if in my spare time I could chair the NRCB, which, and it was, I didn't have to put a lot of time and effort into. But then the province announced, because intensive livestock was just blowing up. It was awful. Yep. And they announced that they were going to build a new provincial regulatory system for it. So I stuck my hand up and I said, we could deliver that for you if you want it. The Premier, Ralph Klein, said, yeah, that was a good idea. And then, of course, we're supposed to start January 1, and that fall before you darn politicians froze all new funding for everything. And we had some interesting sidebars to that. So once there was a provincial system, not every, but a lot of the issues were that did involve water, manure in water, flowing off-site, etc. Fisheries and Oceans became interested.
Interesting.
Yes, and so they said to us, okay, well, this is really into our area, and we said we'd like to come along with you guys. This is perfectly topical. Yep. So we had a choice. We could get up and get it up on our hind legs and say, oh no, or we just said, yeah, sure. After about a month, they said, would you please stop phoning?
You don't need to be consulted that much.
Yeah, it was exactly. We in that first year, we responded to 950 complaints at over 200 facilities. So if you figure, at least 100 of them had water to it.
Yeah.
So within really quickly, they were swamped in love.
Swamped in love. And so 3 times a week they're out with your team.
Exactly. Yeah. And they said, okay, you guys know what you're doing. It's fine. That was a lesson I learned, dealing with between governments, especially with the feds. I dealt with them. I've done 4 joint provincial federal review panels, right? And so they're often awkward and not very competent, I'll be honest, but instead of making it a battle, it's the jujitsu of regulation. You basically say, use their mass against them, and eventually they'll just say, okay, we quit. Go ahead, do your thing, because we can't keep up.
And the expertise was at the provincial level now.
Absolutely. Yeah. We had I think it was the Minister of Transportation, the federal minister. I think that's what it was. Anyway, one of those, and he was out. We had a big pipeline spill. Somebody asked him about it, and he was embarrassed because he didn't know about it. So their staff called our staff, and they said, we need to be notified when you have a spill. And you got to love this was our guy who's head of environmental protection. He says, okay, what's your 24-hour number? And the guy, there was, I guess, silence on the other end of the line. 24-hour number? He says, well, yeah, we have 900 reportable spills a year. So
how often do you want to be alerted? Yeah.
We'll get back. And they got back and said, we really want to know about any federally regulated pipeline. That narrowed it down.
That narrowed it down a little.
Yeah, it was no problem. But again, I did find though that, they would set a rule, and we'd come back and say, well, again, not fighting, saying, we get it, we get what you're trying to do, but the spirit and intent, are you okay if we do it this way? Over and over, yeah, we can work at that, because we're trying to meet, you're trying to prevent this from happening, so are we, but this works better for us if you're okay with it. And it was never we never had a lot of problem.
Interesting. Tell me about the dynamics in like those big hearings. Like, so let's say you have a joint panel, you got federal, representatives on the, like, how does that play out? Like, what is involved in you getting ready for that? Like, like, how do you figure out what questions you want to engage on? Like, how does that?
Going back to mining, the classic one was in Hinton. The Luscar wanted to expand its mine, so that was a joint federal provincial review, and that was tougher because on the provincial side we are the decision maker. On the federal side we only make recommendations, so we're so the first thing you do is cross a point. In this case, we made a couple of recommendations to the federal government about potential panel members, and so I ended up with a 4-person panel, and the federal guy was somebody that was really well respected in the industry in Alberta. So that helped a lot. Everybody knew him. He's technically very competent. Got cross-appointed. So now you have to but you are thinking about it. So we did talk to the feds, and we said we're gonna run this though, because ours is a quasi-judicial process. Yeah. So we said we're gonna use our rules, and they were okay with that. They didn't have a problem. It is funny. This is good. When we did the very first one, we couldn't get I think it was McMillan Bloedel. We couldn't get the pulp and paper company to come in to talk about their plans, even though it was a surface mine. And so when we wrote the decision, you said there are still some uncertainties around forestry operations in the region, but this is a 30-year project and we can manage it. It took about 8 tries, but they finally found a judge that said no. Federal requirements is that you have to deal with every single potential impact. And so we'd been a little casual with our language, and they got it. So we had to redo the hearing. We ended up redoing a fairly big chunk. Then I realized it all says we heart Luscar. They were all for the project. And in fact, at the outset of the hearing, because some of the environmental groups were kind of getting, they were nervous. They were a little, and I said, we don't have to hold, we would really want to hold this hearing in the community. But if for whatever reason it becomes impossible, we will move this to Calgary in a heartbeat. After that, apparently,
things calmed down.
Everybody calmed down, because they did not want to see that happen. Yeah, that was a fascinating process.
One kind of last theme that I want to kind of touch on is that a lot of our audience are regulatory professionals, environmental scientists, or engineers or lawyers in the field. Like, any guidance? You kind of been there, seen probably almost every challenge that could come your way in a regulatory world. Like, any guidance you'd provide to like a younger professional in this field that is passionate about getting projects built? Or
I think we've kind of almost touched on it. There's that 2 elements. One is getting it through the regulatory process sans the hearing. Okay, which, just as a sidebar, I used to not think we never thought going to hearing was actually a failure of process. What it meant is that you hit a place where the company wanted this and the affected parties wanted this, and there was just a disagree. You know, they were never going to share views. You know, and so we didn't push companies to go back over and over and over again, try to convince somebody, oh, you really want a surface mine, because they're never going to want a surface mine. Sorry, you know. So we didn't accept. So that's been a change where it's sort of like, oh, if we go to hearing, it's a failure process. Now the trick is to make the hearings really quick, efficient, get a decision out. And a well-run hearing, we found often actually built relationships, especially you know if the regulator worked with both sides and you know behind the scenes and got the more conversations going. So giving advice, though, build those relationships with your regulator. Don't look at them as the cop. You're not breaking the rules. You know, if you're breaking the rules, okay, that's
a different conversation.
Then, but if you're comfortable, your company's doing the good job. You know, just establish that relationship. Explain what you're trying to do. If you got a disconnect, sit down, talk about it. Make absolutely sure you've done everything you can to get your community on side. Figure out, you know, don't go into those meetings with stakeholders saying, okay, this is how the project must be. Okay. Again, there is something. Yeah, I don't mind passing this on. Go in as soon as your company is starting to think about a concept. Unless there's some really important business reason that you have to stay quiet. And those are rare because how often do you keep a major project very secret? Get in, like people say, oh, well, I don't know quite what the footprint of the mine's going to look like. The landowners don't care. They're okay with that if you're uncertain. You know, just be upfront. Say, we don't know yet. We think it's
in the zone.
Yeah. Don't be cute. Tell them straight out, we don't know, and there'll be a few people that say, oh, you're wasting our time, and then say, well, so, you know, apologize, sorry, we just wanted to get out here as soon as we can, and then, so get out as early as a project as you possibly can, because coming in, because the reverse of that is you come in, you've got all these beautiful diagrams, so where's the negotiation around that, right? So that's the perfect example. Another one, and every company I've ever talked to, there's two. I'm glad you gave me this opportunity. Yeah. Compensation for the impact of your project on a landowner or, you know. I can't tell you how many times they're getting a windfall from our project. And I'm going, no, they're not. And the perfect example, so on another project, another big surface mine, the company said, well, we're going to pay them full market value for their land. And we said, time out. Here, have this conversation with your spouse tonight going home. Honey, we have to sell the house. The law says we don't have any choice. I have to quit my job too, because you're not. And we don't exactly know when that's going to happen, but it'll be sometime in the next 30 years. But don't worry, we're getting fair market value.
Yeah, that's not going to go over well.
And bless their hearts, these are, you know, oh, it's exactly said. Oh, Jesus, that would be awful. That would be a terrible. But that's what you're saying to these farmers.
What people are hearing. Yeah.
And so we came back. We actually tested with our industry neighbors, and we came back and said, listen, offer them 1.5 times fair market value, and offer them the ability to sell when they're ready. If you're not ready yet, but they want to sell, you'll buy them out and give them full replacement costs for their buildings. You're not going to negotiate, that's an old barn, because he's got to replace it. Yeah. Okay. And we went back to the community with that, and suddenly where there had been nothing but real anger, and the funny part is the mining engineer said, we'll save that in the first 2 years, because everybody's going to say that deal may not last, and they're going to sell. You're going to own this whole piece of land.
Look at the first production
and
faster.
We'll save you that money back in 2 years. It was in the scope of things, it was really, really small. The other thing, there's two more things. The other thing, when a new rule comes out in your industry, please do not say, oh my God, we're going out of business.
Oh, you hear that one all the time.
All the time. I am sure somebody said that the first day they said, you're going to have hard hats. You know?
Or seat belts or whatever.
Yeah, Nomex coveralls. I mean, we heard that with Nomex. You know, and so, you know, sour gas, you know, oh, you're going to have to do sulfur recovery. Remember, it was originally in the 50s, it was like 60% sulfur recovery. Now it's 99.98%. But we're all going, you know, we're going to shut our plants down. I don't know of a single project that has gone down. So stop saying you're putting us out of business. You just sound like schmucks on that sort of stuff. So, you know, those would be two things for sure that I would. There was a third one, and it's already slipped my soul. I'm getting old, but there's a you know, just trying to, anyway. There's other things that they do, and you kind of wish they wouldn't do, and they don't need to do.
But it's funny, a comparable story I have, and that was like a big energy company. They were asking for like a new tax credit subsidy that they had a novel idea, a brilliant idea, and they're asking me for, you know, we only need this and we'll build this facility here. And I'm like, well, how much the corporate tax cut that we put in place, because we had a big corporate tax cut when we first came into government. I'm like, how much did that save your company? Well, shouldn't that margin have just been invested? That's more than what you're actually asking for here. And they're like, well, that's a completely different issue. I'm like, is it really?
Yeah.
I'm like, is it really?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and there's, you know, be sure if you're going in and you're negotiating, be sure you understand. Assume the guy across the table understands this about as well as you do. Don't think you're going to go in and trick somebody.
Yeah.
Go in with a straight case, and yeah. So and there. I do remember the third one is everybody wants you, the government. They want regulatory streamlining, right? Always. And when they want it is when they're actually filing an application. They are so motivated to get these regulations changed. The moment they get their approval, their interest in working on that issue disappears. And I have seen this literally dozens of times. Oh yeah, we really need these, streamlined rules. Get your approval. Oh well, we'll get to that when we file our next application, right? Which is, so if you're serious about it, be serious about it. Sit, and don't assume your association's going to do it. Put a consortium of 4 or 5 companies that are really thought leaders and are, thinking outside the box and working on what's the spirit and intent of the rule. Can we get there a better way? But yeah, they have just that. I've even given talks on that. I said, to the whole audience, I said, well, I'm here to tell you about regulatory streamlining, but I'm kind of wasting my time. I really was that blunt. I said, you'll all come out of here saying the right things, but I just know.
There's other priorities.
You'll lose it. Yeah, it's only a priority in that very short window. And in your business, in your new business, I mean, that's the other thing. You think you guys, each company, like people that work for a company for their career or half their career, might work on one large project, right? Almost everybody's a virgin when they come into these processes, and so they need people like yourself to say, okay, we've seen this before. We've seen this. We've seen this. We've seen this. Don't make these. These are mistakes. These are avoidable mistakes. These are
we're going to learn.
Yeah, because that's new to them, And when you come in to advise them, you kind of forget that sometimes too. You sort of go, "Why are you doing that?"
Because you're living this every day.
This is like a one-off. Yeah. That's exactly. So no, and the more your company goes, you'll see that more, and that's the value of what you're offering is that. Seen it, done that. Please don't make this.
Let's do that again.
Don't do what your competitor did. And let's do this better.
Again, thank you so much for the time and doing this, taking time out of your day to be part of our podcast here. I hope the audience enjoyed our discussion back and forth. I mean, I learned a lot in this engagement. So really appreciate it. And thanks so much. And thanks again to the audience for being part of our podcast journey.
Well, thank you. It was fun. Like I say, now I'm going to go back and have more dreams about old projects. Thank you.
Well, hopefully that's good memories. Thanks so much.